When has a gut feeling saved your life? I almost got kidnapped once. I was like 23 or so. I was walking down my street at a little after dusk. I saw a van approaching a little ahead, no lights on. Didn't think much of it due to the time of day. The van slowed down and almost started creeping, as I was approaching this part of the sidewalk which had a tall solid wall fence to a community. This gave me some pause in that quick moment. For me to keep walking, I'd have to go between the wall and the van. In the little time it took me to take a couple of steps, and as the van was getting close, I noticed that the side door was slowly sliding open. The one thought in my mind was, why isn't the light turning on inside the van? When you open the door of a vehicle, the light should come on inside it. Unless you deliberately switch that off. And I just ran to the median. I ran in front of the van and across the street. Because if they're gonna have some use of roadkill me, have at it. But they're not getting me in one glorious piece. Immediately, the van took off like someone lit it on fire. From a slow crawl to full speed. As I looked after it to see the plates, I noticed it had no plates. And still no lights. I called the police, of course. They sent cars out and didn't find the van. I never had anything like this happen again, and I'm just an ordinary person, so I don't suspect it was targeted. I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Always hated the dad scout leader in my area growing up. Just seemed like a real creep. Hated seeing him at community events, soccer games, back to school nights, etc. 10-year-old me staged a hissy fit to end all meltdowns with me slamming doors, crying and breaking shit to avoid being moved from Cub Scouts, where the moms ran things, to avoid Boy Scouts. Turns out the scout leader was molesting 3 or 4 of the boys in the troop and threatening to kill them if they ever spoke. Justice found him and he's in prison. I get really bad vibes from the car park in work. It's a giant, poorly lit multi-story and I've seen enough horror films to know I shouldn't be taking it lightly. Whenever I get in, I pay attention to the floors people call the lift to keep an eye on where they're going. One time a guy got in front of me and pressed 6, while I was parked on 8. He didn't get out at 6, and was still in the lift as I got to my floor. I leave, he doesn't. So I guess he's remembered he's on another floor, but just before I get to the dark area with all the cars, I turned back. This guy had waited about 30 seconds, therefore held the lift to wait, and silently emerged to follow me. I just stopped and stared him down. He had a deer in the headlights look and turned straight back to the lift. I have no idea if it saved my life, but it freaked me the fuck out. I live in rural Connecticut, and my mom was driving me down dark, twisty roads to my friend's house, and in the middle of the road was a yellow caution tape. Not police line, do not cross tape, but just tape that said caution, blocking the whole road. It had been clearly ripped and tied back together in some places. My mom examined it and gunned it in reverse and got out of there fast. That same night, some woman had gotten out to examine it and had gotten back in the car to call the police because she found it suspicious, but not suspicious enough to leave before calling 911. She was grabbed out of her car, but the people who grabbed her didn't know she had called 911, and the police rolled up as the car was driving away with her in the trunk. They chased them down and she lived, but it was scary. Trust your gut with roadblocks. When I was around 18, I was on a back road with some friends and a girl I didn't know was driving really fast. Now, I'm a bit of an adrenaline junkie, and I have always enjoyed a calculated risk in the name of a good time, but on this occasion I told her to either slow the F down or let me out. I literally had to start screaming at her before she listened and slowed down. A week later she crashed on that same stretch of road at 90 meters per hour, killing her, and the 3 passengers of her car. My husband is a state trooper and has always said the wreck that sticks with him the most was a group of 4, 17 to 18-year-olds in a car speeding on the freeway. One of the kids was screaming and begging the driver to let him out. The driver pulled over and let him out as he and the other 2 passengers made fun of him for being a coward and not wanting to have fun. A couple miles later, the driver flew off an overpass, went over the guardrail, and onto the freeway below, killing him, and the other 2 passengers instantly and ejecting one out of the car. Luckily, there was no one below that they fell onto. My husband always remembers that kid who demanded to get out and how terrified and shaken he was when he walked up on what happened and was able to explain that he was in the car with them just minutes prior, and would have been dead had he not been a coward. I was at the county fair when I was younger, like 8 or 9. I wandered off from my parents and I had an odd feeling that I was being watched, but I ignored that for some reason. This man had followed me up and down the walkways of the expo hall we were standing in. As he started to get closer, I got this overwhelming feeling of fright. I called for my dad and I could tell it startled him. He promptly turned and changed direction from me. A really quick thing, but it stuck with me all these years. I don't know if I'd call this gut reaction, but when I was riding motorcycles full-time as a courier, I developed what I can only describe as a subconscious autopilot. There were many instances where I made an avoidance maneuver, but it took me a second to realize why I had done it. In each case I figured out the reason and agreed with my subconscious. There was only one where it was not only correct, but I know saved me from death or serious injury. As I moved off from a set of traffic light, I just caught fast movement some distance off in the corner of my eye. There was no conscious decision at all. I performed the most extreme braking maneuver I have ever attempted. The bike stood up on its front wheel, which was then smashed out from under me by the car which ran the red light at speed. I basically made a barrel roll in place, and was dumped on the ground. No serious injuries, but maybe a bruise or two. I was staying at a friend's house out in the country. He was asleep in another room. I was dozing off with his gigantic pit bull Izzy Belle, sweet girl. In the middle of the night I am awoken by sounds outside, like scrabbling. Izzy leaps up too, looks at me then the back door and growls. My friend at the time had a young daughter, 4 or 5, so I immediately think of her. I grab the nearest weapon, which is a fire poker, and go to open the door as Izzy is beside me seemingly ready for a fight. But it didn't feel right. I instead bar the door best I can and creep to a window looking out. Outside is a gigantic bear. So big it could easily rip my head off, and it has a few cubs in tow. I watch as it ambles off. I am pretty sure that if I had charged out of that door as I originally intended, me and Izzy would not be here today. I used to date a girl who I would go see every night after I got off work. I worked until midnight. I would stay at her house until about 1 or 2 a.m. Sometimes as I left her house she would follow me in her car and stop at a nearby all-night grocery store. I always begged her not to, but she always said she'd be fine. Sometimes I would wait in the parking lot until she came back out and then we'd go our separate ways. Sometimes I wouldn't. So one time I felt ill, so as we left she said, "Just go straight home, I'll be fine." I always am, but for some reason I felt like that's the night I needed to be here. She thought I went straight home. I was in the parking lot as she pulled in, but she didn't see me. As she walked in, a shady-looking dude was walking out. She ignored him, but he looked back at her about 3 or 4 times. Then he gets to his truck and another guy is in there and they talk through the window for a minute, looking back at the store a couple times. The second guy gets out of the truck, gets something out of the back of it, then they both head back into the store. I couldn't be sure they were going to do anything, but hell if I was gonna take a chance. I go into the store too. I see them going past every aisle and then motion to each other like, "There she is." So I walk a bit faster to catch up. I turn into the aisle just as they are approaching her. They are looking at each other. From behind I yell, "Hey!" They both turn and so does my girlfriend. I brush by them and give them a look. I had some muscle back then and was 6 feet 4 inches, and say, "Hey guys." They nod awkwardly as my girlfriend says to me, "What are you doing here?" I kiss her and make up some story about wanting to buy aspirin. The 2 guys leave. I never told my girlfriend that story, I don't know why. I kinda felt like a superhero to myself. We dated about 2 more years after that. I don't know what they were going to do to slash with her, but it was nothing good. I was at a pub party being held for my boyfriend's father, but I had a headache that wasn't going away. I had been drinking, but I wasn't drunk. I was just feeling like crap. So I made my excuses and left to walk home alone as I didn't want to ruin his night with his dad. It was a 10-minute walk, if that, from the pub to our house, and it wasn't properly dark yet. I walked down the street and passed a man sitting on a wall drinking a beer. A minute after I passed, I heard the bottle smash and then footsteps a little while back. Nothing unusual. It was a main road and there was another pub further along, but something in my gut was screaming something was wrong. So I hurriedly walked to the pub and stopped outside to ask the smokers for a light and a chat as I smoked. I watched him pass by me, and then stare at me from across the street for an uncomfortable amount of time. With my gut screaming at me, I asked a bouncer working the doors if he could order me a taxi. A few weeks later, while in the town center, I saw a mugshot of the same dude wanted for rape. I was 13 to 14. The bus would take me home from school in 15 minutes, but I liked walking 1 hour home. While walking on a main road, I saw a van pulled over, some 100 feet away from me. It wasn't a family van, it was those utility boxy looking ones. The van door was open and a man was waving at me with both of his arms. Too far to hear what he was saying. Usually, I love to help people, but something told me to keep walking. So I kept walking. I look back 5 minutes later, this guy is walking behind me. Relaxed pace. I'm not worried, but I walk a little faster. I look back maybe 2 to 3 minutes later and he's still walking. But closer, and waving his arms again. So I start jogging a little. Now he's jogging. Then I start running as fast as I can, not stopping to look back. At one point, I turned onto the next street and couldn't see him anymore. I was so cold with fear, out of breath, waiting for the intersection light to change. Light changed, I went back to walking, I was out of breath. 5 minutes later, I look back and he's still following me. So I ran the last 2 minutes to my building. I didn't want him to see where I lived. I ran into the building lobby, looked through the glass doors. He wasn't there. I pushed the elevator button, and went back to the glass door and saw him on the street far away, still walking. I've always tried to make sense of what he was going to do. This was a busy suburban area. Was he going to just stab me and run away? What did he want with me in particular? Did he just leave his van behind to get towed? So many questions. So weird.